Welcome to Next in Health. I'm Glenn Hunzinger, PwC's Health Industries Leader. We're here in San Francisco for the JPM Healthcare Conference. This is my favorite time of the year. It's a time everyone gets together to really talk about the year ahead, what the future of our industry looks like, what's the most exciting, and no doubt there is a buzz here around the innovation around science. Today, we're going to talk about where the growth in our industry is going to come from, what it's going to look like in the next 5 to 10 years, and what my esteemed guests here are the most excited about. So today I'm joined with Sunil Patel, Senior Vice President, Head of Corporate Development at Merck, and Sumit Khedekar, who's the Global Head of Investment Banking for Healthcare at Citigroup. Gentlemen, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Let's jump right in. Where's growth going to come from? What areas? What do you think?
I think the one thing when I think about growth, I don't really focus on any snapshots in time and what's right in front of us today. I take a much more macro theme about it. And when I think about this industry and biotech and everything, it can go in cycles, but this is a fantastic time to be in healthcare and be in where we are in pharma, because science is continually cultivating. And we don't really get focused on what's happening today. It's like, is the ecosystem operating the way it should be? And for me, it is. There's always amazing science turning up. When you're at a company like Merck, who really focuses on fundamental science, it's exciting no matter what year you are in, what decade, because there's always amazing science turning up. And for us, that's what we're wanting to make sure, is the VC market taking the bets that they're supposed to, bringing out great science, whether it be from, a group who just wanted to start it, maybe they spun out of a company and they want to go and do something on their own, or academia. As long as that's working, there's always amazing things happening. And that's where we're kind of focused on, is just making sure that great science, we have a front, row seat to it. We're engaged with companies early, and we can then hopefully have a differentiated view to bring that science into Merck. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's only been a couple of days here, but I think that is absolutely the buzz right now, is the science and the innovation that's out there. And I think I'm hearing more now than ever where people are talking about, like, we're going to see where science sort of takes us, and we're going to follow it a bit more. Sumit, maybe talk a little bit about, like, what are you seeing? How do you advise clients there?
Yeah, sure. Look, I agree with everything Sunil said, and I'd put it just a little differently, which is it's honestly a great time to think of yourself as a patient too, right? Mm-hmm. With the size of the unmet need, there is the amount of innovation that's coming, not just from things in the US, but beyond. You've seen the emergence of China as a big source of innovation. Artificial intelligence is becoming more important, not just on the clinical and the research side, but also on the commercial side. How are patients getting access to these medicines? What's the end state? Beyond pharmaceuticals, there's a lot of innovation in diagnostics, right? You have these blood-based cancer tests now. So if you look more broadly at it, I think that's the most important thing to me, that if I would rather be a patient today than at any other time in our history. And that's the piece that's most exciting. Yeah,
it's quite exciting. And you spoke a little bit about China, and it's clear that half of the licensing deals last year, were from China. And I think for years we've been hearing about the quality of the assets coming out and just the speed in which you could do it, which definitely, I'm sure, is putting the U.S. biotech market and the FDA on notice on, from a U.S. perspective, how do we sort of compete? But maybe we dovetail a little bit into, how do you sort of invest into this riskier environment? Appropriate capital allocation, but how do you think about advising clients through this?
Yeah, my perspective is, if you spend a second on the industry structure, right, you have 20, 30 companies with $50+ billion market caps, really strong balance sheets. So there isn't enough growth to feed all of them, right? So you have to start thinking about, what do I do? How do I deploy my capital in ways that are intelligent and deliver the right returns for my shareholders? The industry as a whole hasn't delivered a lot by way of shareholder return over the last decade, and it's been a challenge for everybody. And I think part of what you're seeing now as people think about allocating their capital is, how can we be more forward-footed, right? So if I think about analytics in the NFL or any sport, right, people never went for it on fourth down, right? The pharma equivalent would be going and acquiring a company pre-data. And I think Merck and Sunil were the pioneers in some of this, which is just sort of doing the calculation and saying, let's take the calculated risk, because the value capture for the buyer is normally in the development stage. So that's sort of a little bit of my perspective on how people have thought about risk. You have to calibrate it, because if it's too big and you're wrong, that's a really bad outcome. But as long as you can manage the downside, I think that's an approach where we've seen more and more people get comfortable with that concept. I don't know if you agree.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I mean, what we always say at Merck is, we're fortunate we have a lot of capital, but that capital is built up over 150 years of people dedicating their lives to our company. And you really have to be disciplined in this market with this ecosystem, because you can make it disappear overnight. And there's a lot of trust that the board of directors, the shareholders, the executive team, the employees put in a select few to make those decisions right. And for us, we think, and a lot of what Sumit said, you can create great value for yourself pending where you enter into a drug's life cycle. And, for us, we've decided that really when we think about clinical assets, and I think that's where a lot of the focus, that's where a lot of the headlines come, is when you do a clinical stage deal. There is an inflection point where you can get in early enough if you're really focused on the diligence and you have great expertise in that area. You can come in while the cards haven't turned over all the time, where you're maybe have phase 2 data, it's going into phase 3. That can be a great point. Early phase 3, that's a little riskier, but if you really have a fundamental differentiated view, you can create value there. Because once something gets fully de-risked and launched, then you're in a whole different, you're in a different price point. You're struggling to create the value. And that's the real thing you have to ask. And exactly what Sumit said is, where can you come in with a differentiated view and still create value for patients, for your shareholders, for your company? And I think getting in sometimes, mid-inflection point on a clinical program, that's where you can create value. But the greatest value is always created when you can get in with something really early, discovery phase, preclinical. You'll see a lot of companies willing to transact there. Of course, the hit rate is very different. You're more in the 5%-10% range. But those sort of programs where you can stay with the get in early and really fundamentally put your value into it, that's where you can create the most value for yourself.
Yeah, and I think you raised a good point, which is the industry has a shareholder challenge, right? It's always kind of generally underperformed the market, and heavy on compliance. There's a lot of rules and regs, pricing. You don't have the elasticity, and so you really have to look for what can you bring to the table to create value. Sunil, when you talk about that, how do you think about your time and allocating your time and sort of your investments through those phases of discovery?
So my time personally?
Yeah, and the company's investment.
We at Merck, I think the wonderful thing is we truly believe all the way to every employee that we are a science-focused company. And for us, we want to be with each company wherever they are on their scientific journey. And most of it, we want to get in early. We want to track these companies. We want to have active dialogue. Sometimes we talk to them and we try to work out a transaction. It doesn't work out. But that doesn't mean it's over. It means that we're going to keep staying engaged. We're going to help them, give them very, candid views on how we see their science, what they can do to actually make it better. Because always having an active dialogue with a partner or a potential company makes you both better. And then for us, it's really trying to find out what's the right time for the company on their journey and Merck on where we are and how we prioritize it to see if there's a time and a place where it makes sense to come together. For us, we're very patient. We don't have to jump in and do something right away. And what you want to have is a company that's ready to turn over their program at the right time, because then that's when they're most, they're all in to then knowing that the right partner in the right place is big pharma, because there's a place for entrepreneurs to take risk and cultivate science, and then there's a time for big pharma to come in. And knowing when you can get to that place, I think it's where you can create the most value.
Yeah, and I think you kind of hit on it with this idea of trust. If somebody has a biotech company founded, they want to make sure whoever is their partner, long-term partner, there's a trust to sort of get to the next level. Maybe Sumit, just pivoting that and just hitting on sort of on the value piece and where premiums are. Like, how do you see that playing out? And obviously, to your point, the stage of the asset plays into here.
I think the premiums are important, and it's a metric a lot of people track. I tend to think more of it as fundamental value, and what does the buyer get, what does the seller get? In most of these instances, the seller is getting paid for the innovation they've developed, but also they're taking off some of the risk off on the commercial risk. If you think about it from the buyer's standpoint, I think it's just helpful to have in mind the base rates, right? So we've done this analysis for a number of years. Most deals don't achieve the deal thesis, right? So if you track it over time, I'd say the vast majority of them are either below or sometimes significantly below the forecast, and some, in fact, fail in clinical trials. So the mindset I think that we at least suggest to people to have in this is you have to have the few winners that are going to carry a bunch of losers, right? And so you have to have a little bit of that mindset when you're doing it. And identifying those true winners requires insight and skill. And that's where I think a lot of companies really need to be honest with themselves, right? Where are we different? Where do we have special insight?
Yeah, that's quite interesting. And obviously, it's a risky environment to be able to invest in. It's really hard to balance it. To your point, Sunil, you really have to have like the capabilities to sort of really evaluate and find those sort of gems. So when you guys think about kind of what's ahead, how do you think about emerging trends? What are you guys seeing? What do you feel, in the next year and beyond? Sunil, maybe we'll start with you.
I think, when we think about it, we really try to just keep an open mind and not make too many bold predictions, because if we look back 5 years, nobody would have thought like some of the breakthroughs that are happening. I just go back to like sort of areas that are of interest right now for Merck. And, we see a lot of exciting things happening in the I&I field. It's a crowded field, but I think there's still some really unique insights happening there. And some science turning over, so we're really focused there. I think oncology, the patient need is still there, and I'll even back up to a deeper, more fundamental thing. Is like, where do we see great patient need? Patients, no matter all the breakthroughs we've made in oncology, and Keytruda has been a wonder drug, it's still, we have patients dying, and that's not acceptable, and the standard of care needs to be elevated. So we see a lot of sort of really interesting science happening in oncology. So that's an area that we're really focused on, like I said, immunology, and that's really still an area that I think can be untapped, and it has a lot more potential. So, those are sort of some of the key areas that we're kind of focused on right now.
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective because you hear it's a crowded space, but I think that's an enlightening view, which is there's still a lot of unmet need there for the patient. People don't talk enough about that. So, when you look about, some of that frontier innovation and what you're excited about, what are you kind of seeing, thinking?
I think mostly the same things that Sunil touched on, right? You think about where the unmet need is, where is the opportunity. I also think we're not very good at predicting what's next, right? Like 15 years ago, everybody was super excited about Hep C. After that, it was immuno-oncology, right? And even if you think about where the immuno-oncology drugs like Keytruda ended up working, it was not obvious that they would work in those areas at the outset. So I think we continue to be quite surprised by things. So I'm sure in 5 years there'll be a bunch of things we're talking about that we didn't have a great sense of they were emerging. I do think this whole question of the diagnostics, catching things early, especially things like cancer, I think is going to be a much bigger part of the treatment paradigm. I think how we pay for things just on a global scale, I think that's going to see a lot of evolution, and that'll change some of the behavior of both the drug companies and probably the whole insurer system. So I think those are some of the other big areas that I think will change, and that'll have some implications for industry structure over time.
Yeah. This idea of the rise of the consumer is certainly here. We did a study of 4,000 sort of patients and consumers out there, and it's clear, sandwich generation, which is, us, we're caring for our parents, our kids, ourselves. We want to be enabled, but the interesting thing is the Gen Z are demanding it. They're tech native. They actually have a lot of trust in technology companies. It's a very sort of different mindset, but they're demanding the change. They want it. They want to be empowered. They want all this information at their fingertips, and they want it to be personalized, right? Which it's good to hear. There's no doubt the trends are all heading there.
No, and I think Sumit brings up a really good point. We focus so much on science, getting a drug developed, but the payer system is changing on us radically. And I think that's the one thing that some of our, biotech peers still are trying to catch up to as they develop drugs. It's like, not only you have to develop drug, you have to develop drugs that, is going to fit into the new world of the way healthcare systems are evolving, the way, the IRA is sitting out there, MFN. There's just a lot of geopolitical things that are happening in this industry. And they're not, whenever something happens, rarely does it revert back. So it's sort of the new norm. Yeah. And I think those are the things that you have to really be focused on. And that is, you have to bring forward you have to bring a drug forward into an area of a high unmet medical need, and that drug needs to have a profound impact in that area. And, if you can stay focused on that, you'll be okay. But bringing forward sort of incremental innovation, it's just going to be more challenging and challenging.
Yeah, I think the word profound is a good one there. Because you're right. I mean, the U.S. is $5 trillion healthcare spend, growing at 8%, while pharma is only 13 to 14% of that. Certainly gets sometimes an oversized focus. So you're right, having some profound science there. So guys, as you think about you've been in this field a long time, what are you most excited about? What do you think about when you think about the future, your children, the science ahead? What's the one thing that maybe people don't know about that you've got your sort of eye on? Maybe Sunil, I'll start with you.
Look, I think Sumit said it. I mean, to be a patient right now in this environment is probably, I'm sure forward looking, it'll even be better then. But what I'm most excited about is the industry collectively, they're tackling big healthcare problems. And these are problems that, you didn't even think were around. Just think about even cardiovascular disease. I think most people thought we were okay, but now we're making just huge strides there. I think neuroscience was the one area that I failed to touch upon. That is still the most untapped area. And I think people are really dedicated, especially in the big pharmas. I don't think people give the big pharmas enough credit, and I think all of our peers, they're all still dedicated there. And we are going to tackle some really major healthcare needs in neuroscience. And I think those are the things I'm looking most forward to, because that's the one area that I still think needs a really focused effort. And I believe enough of us are focused there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, just think about Alzheimer's and the drain on families to try to care is just kind of wild. Sumit, leave our audience with some great views here.
No, I just think we should just be really grateful for everything the industry has given to us, right? And we just went through COVID not so long ago, right? We've come to the other end of it. And I agree with Sunil, the industry doesn't get enough credit for the risk they take on, right? A lot of people think, the drug companies make so much money, et cetera. The reality is the returns for shareholders haven't been great. Yeah. And you sort of have to believe that on the other end, there is a social contract in which society will find a way to pay for the innovation and the risk that the companies are taking on. And I'm hopeful that people are going to see the value that we're getting from these medicines, and that it's probably going to be an ever better time to be a patient. And certainly I'm hopeful that, when our kids are older, they will have much better care available. The last thing I'd say is we focus a lot of our conversation around the US and the developed world, but the unmet need in a lot of the developing world is even greater, right? So getting them access to some of these medicines over time in the right construct, I think, is also going to be a huge wave that'll improve human health just across the board.
Perfect. Sunil, Sumit, thank you both for being here and sharing your perspective about what excites you most about our industry and where you see really that future of science and how to sort of balance that with growth and how executives are thinking about it. I think it's a super helpful perspective for our teams. So team, it'll be exciting to see what's ahead for 2026. On behalf of PwC, thank you both for being here. For more on these topics and other topics across health industries, please subscribe to our podcast at pwc.com/us/Next in Health podcast. Until next time, this has been Next in Health.
This podcast is brought to you by PwC, all rights reserved. PwC refers to the U.S. member firm or one of its subsidiaries or affiliates, and may sometimes refer to the PwC network. Each member firm is a separate legal entity. Please see www.pwc.com/structure for further details. This podcast is for general information purposes only and should not be used as a substitute for consultation with professional advisors.